In this video, we will do an overview of a theory of learning and then address ways for preparing for tests. This video is paired with another video in addressing two important aspects of the college academic experience: test preparation and note-taking. But in order to explore these two learning techniques, we first need to delve into what learning is and therefore what are the implications for how we go about preparing for tests and taking notes. There are various models out there to explain how we go about learning. From your experience in the classroom, you already have an idea about what the current educational system assumes about learning. The current educational system generally assumes the student is an empty vessel waiting to be filled with facts and information. This idea makes for a pretty straightforward model of education. Think about filling up a cup from a pitcher. The cup does nothing, it just sits there and is filled while the action takes place from the pitcher. Do you kind of see where I'm going with this? There's tons of research out there indicating this format isn't exactly ideal for learning. I mean, look at this. Even right now, I'm having you watch this video and passively intake information, although my design is for you to work with students to practice what you learn here. There are a few problems with this pitcher-cup model. Learning is an active and fluid process. It's not linear. It's not A, then B, then C. Another problem with the model of the cup and the pitcher is that the learner is never empty. Even babies come into the world with built-in systems and knowledge which guides them in their learning. Yes, this knowledge is primarily instinctual, but it is still knowledge. As you get older, you accumulate more and more knowledge, or at least more and more understanding of the world. I discussed this in other videos, but the way we perceive the world around us is by creating a map of the world. We take in information through our various senses and previous experiences and create a map that helps us function in the world. When we come across something in the world that doesn't line up with this mental map, we either have to adjust our map so that it fits with the new information, or we have to change the world to fit how we see the world. Obviously, the latter is more difficult than the former. Learning, therefore, should be better understood as a reorganizing of our mental maps. Think about a preschool-aged child. Before they get to kindergarten, they experience the world around them. They constantly ask questions. They ask questions like, why does this work this way? And why do we do such and such in this way? Preschool-aged kids are little scientists, always looking at how things work and asking questions. Well, let's say they get to kindergarten and start learning about how plants grow. The child has likely already asked their parents what makes plants grow, and the parents have likely given some kind of answer, and the child has a preconceived idea about how it works. For the child to learn, their map of how plants grow must be reshaped, and their understanding of how plants grow is going to become more and more sophisticated as they grow older and learn more. But it is a constant reshaping of the understanding that already exists. Learning is not a passive experience of being filled with new information. As a side note, I think this should help from the perspective of the general education requirements within colleges. You may look at the biology class and think, ugh, I have already taken biology like 5 times, I don't need another class on it. But taking biology in college means you get to continue to refine the map you currently possess for biology. You get to hone it to a greater degree. Our understanding of any given subject is never complete. There's always more to learn. Okay, side note over. Now, I hope this convinces you that you are not a cup. I know, it's difficult to believe. You are a tangled web of information that must be reshaped and redefined constantly. The next aspect of learning I want to emphasize is that of mindset. There are generally 2 mindsets you can have regarding learning. There's a fixed mindset and there's a growth mindset. A fixed mindset basically says, well, skills are pretty much fixed points. Sure, I can learn a little bit about something, but there are people who are good at math and there are people who are good at English. There isn't much you can do about getting better at something if you're just not bent towards it. This attitude is reflected in statements like, I'm just not good at math, or I'm not very good at skateboarding. Those with a growth mindset say, I don't have that skill, but if I take time and energy and I'm careful to practice it in the right way, I can get good at anything. This attitude is reflected in statements like, I don't know how to do that, but give me some time and I'll have it down. Which one do you think is more conducive to learning, and which one do you think is closer to how our brain works? Yep, fixed mindset. Nah, I'm just playing. Growth mindset! There have been studies that indicate just possessing the belief that you can learn actually causes more learning. This quote from Dune sums it up pretty well. Muad'Dib learned rapidly because his first training was in how to learn, and the first lesson of all was the basic trust that he could learn. It's shocking to find how many people do not believe they can learn, and how many more believe learning to be difficult. Muad'Dib knew that every experience carries its lesson. Seriously? Another quote from Dune? What's wrong with you? Dune is awesome. Nerd! Seriously though, this is a brilliant observation. Those with a growth mindset say everything, no matter how trivial, contains a lesson to be learned. Another aspect of growth mindset says repetition and correction of repetition is the father of learning. Those with a growth mindset know that they have to practice, and practice effectively in order to increase in skills. Here's a great quote. Don't worry, it's not from Dune. Rather than being pre-wired to be good at certain things, our brains were designed to learn what we do the most. This is a powerful observation and also a powerful caution. First, the implication of this statement is that the more we pour our energy and time into something, something, the more we become proficient at that thing. This is great news because it means if we commit to doing something and consistently practice, we can gain new skills. However, there is an implicit caution as well. If you practice something the wrong way or you practice the wrong thing, then you will become proficient in it. Here's a simple lesson from tennis. Tennis players aren't generally allowed to play racquetball. Why is this? Well, the two sports have two different types of motion to hit a good shot. With racquetball, you need to swing low and to the side in order to hit a ball as close to the ground as possible. With tennis, you have to hit a ball over a net using a higher, more upward motion. If a tennis player plays racquetball, they will begin to train their mind to hit the ball in a different manner than with tennis. That can be detrimental to their performance in an actual game. If you want to get good at tennis, but practice racquetball, you're going to get good at a racquetball swing, but not very good at a tennis swing. The last component of a theory of learning, which I think will help in understanding good study methods, is the purpose of testing. I think it can help you to know, when focusing on strategies for test taking, what the purpose of test taking is. When you are preparing for a test, you need to think about it from the perspective of the instructor. So what's the purpose of testing? Fundamentally, testing is about a person displaying their knowledge so that understanding can be evaluated. That's it. So think about that. In a perfect world, testing would be a one-on-one event. Instructor interacting with the student to find out what they know. And this would take place in whatever would be the best scenario to demonstrate understanding. So let's say you were in a physical therapy class and you had to demonstrate knowledge of how to check someone's knee for injury. Which is the better method for testing? Have the student answer 3 multiple choice questions regarding the subject, or have the student assess a knee that is injured? Of course, we should choose the second option. An instructor wants to know what their student knows. Unfortunately, we live in a world with limited resources, especially time. So educators have devised other methods to find out what students have learned. And honestly, it's not always the best method for testing, but it is what is available. So what is the implication of the purpose of test taking? When you are taking a test, you've got to display everything you know. It's easy to think that multiple choice is easy because you know the answer is there in front of you. However, in a sense, this can also hold you back. Maybe you don't know the exact word, but you could show that you are pretty close to understanding the concept, even if you don't remember exactly what the term was. Short answers may display this better. Keep this in mind when preparing for tests. You are being tested to show the instructor everything you know about the subject, so let loose. Hopefully this at least makes you think about what exactly you believe about learning. Do you think you can learn anything, or are you more on the fixed mindset path? Do you think you need to change your perspective? Now that we have established a theory of learning, let me talk a little bit about the science behind the theory. Specifically, we need to address how memory works. This will help ground why certain study practices are more effective than others. There is a huge amount to say about memory. Memory is complicated, really complicated, and really not understood by scientists. But there is a little bit we know about memory, and that information can help us understand how to study more effectively. Most of what I'm talking about was taken from a book called Brain Rules, in which the molecular biologist John Medina overviews everything we know about the brain. I highly recommend this book. I'm going to focus on short-term and long-term memory as it applies to studying and learning effectively. First, let's talk about short-term memory and what is now referred to as working memory. Short-term memory has generally been understood through the lens of the following analogy. He's constantly taking in packages of information. He can only take a little bit at a time, and when there is more than he is able to take in, then he simply clears off whatever is left on the dock. But with what we know about the brain, specifically what we've learned in the past 20 years, working memory is more complicated and way less linear than what this analogy would say. Working memory seems to have multiple memory slots which specialize in various types of information input. These slots work at the same time. The broad categories for these slots are auditory, which we use to process language, visual, which we use to process what we see, and the final one is the central executive, which is in charge of all the working memory. These slots are short in capacity and short in duration. With this rudimentary understanding of short-term memory, let's talk about how those short-term memories become long-term. Part of this process is called consolidation. Memories are super fragile as they enter our working memory and begin to consolidate. A crazy thing about memory is that most of the time our brains are working on trying to figure out what it can forget. There are various categories the long-term memory is placed in, but scientists don't really agree on what those categories are. One category most researchers agree on is semantic memory, which is basically your ability to remember things like my mom's birthday is on the 27th of September. There also seems to be part of our memory that remembers events in our life as episodes or stories. Now we tend to think that once information gets into that long-term memory system, it is basically there permanently. However, within brain research, it seems that any time a long-term memory is conjured up in our minds, it reverts back to its malleable form. This has really interesting implications, and I think there are good reasons for why this is accurate, and a basic aspect aspect of how we experience things. I'll talk about this with an illustrative example at the end of this section. Another aspect of long-term memory that we need to talk about is storage. We tend to think of memory storage as sort of a library system. A memory is created and then stored somewhere in an orderly and neat fashion. This is accurate for some types of memory. However, some types of memory are retrieved more like a crime scene. Here's a great way to think of it. When you recall certain types of memory, there's a kind of Sherlock Holmes character who receives various and often disjointed pieces of information. Sherlock then puts this information together in a comprehensible, though not necessarily accurate, narrative which helps us understand and make meaning of things. This model helps illustrate how messy our memories actually are. Now, our messy memories may make it seem as though accurate memory is completely out of our reach, but all is not lost. The main thing that can help us create accurate memories is repetition, and I'll talk more about that in the section giving specific study advice. With all this information about how memory works, I'd like to give you an example from my own life that will help connect what implications arise from the understanding of long-term memory. First, the plasticity of our memories implies that our memories are quite fallible and open to being changed. This might seem kind of bad at first, but let's think about it how we experience the world. We are linear beings moving forward in time, and we are constantly changing. Think of a memory you have from when you were a kid. Try to use a memory that's fairly vivid and was meaningful to you as a child. Go on, think of something. I'll wait. Now, with that memory in mind, let's use one of my memories to illustrate some implications. I was at a family reunion when I was about 8 years old. I actually can't remember exactly how old I was, but I was young. I was on a dock fishing with some of my family members, including my dad. The water wasn't very deep and probably wouldn't have come over my head if I had jumped in. You could see the seaweed at the bottom of the lake. Someone had a fishing line in the water, and for some reason I reached out to grab the fishing line. I actually can't even remember if it had a fish on the line or if the line was just snagged or what. Well, when I reached out for it, I apparently reached too far and fell in the water. I remember one minute reaching for the line and then suddenly coming out of the water and pulling myself out as quickly as I could. Now, seaweed terrified me at this age, so as my head came up, all I could think about was, I have to get out of this water and no one is moving fast enough to help me. I quickly climbed out and I believe someone may have helped me. I remember everyone laughing and I tried to think it was funny, but really I was pretty upset and angry at my dad for not pulling me out. This example is rich with illustration about how memory works, so let me draw out some points. First, my memory is in the form of a story. Even as I wrote it down, I wasn't thinking about the actual memory itself. I mean, I wasn't thinking about the things that I actually remember, like my point of view, what I saw, the color of the seaweed, the feeling of being wet when I got out. However, I told you the story of what happened and not what I perceived. Because, and this is an important point, our memories are all about meaning. This brings me to the next point, which is related to all the things I can't seem to recall. I can't remember what I was wearing. I can't remember if I reached for the fishing line because it was snagged or because there was a fish on it. I can't remember who all was there aside from my dad and my cousin Zach. Why can't I remember these things? They have no meaning regarding that memory. It doesn't matter whether I had blue shoes on or whether it was a fish or there wasn't a fish. The meaning in the memory and why it sticks out so strongly in my mind for me is related in large part to my relationship to my dad. And here's the third and really the main point of why I brought up this example. The initial meaning I took away from that event in my life was that my dad is not able to completely shelter me from things, and more specifically, he can't always bail me out. He's not all-knowing and all-powerful. And how I interpreted that as a kid was that somehow he had let me down. But as I've gotten older and reflected on the memory, I've reinterpreted that memory over the years. As I grew into an adult, I recognized that my dad wasn't able to respond quickly because it all happened so fast. And of course, he shouldn't always just rescue me from things. It's good for me to learn how to get myself out of situations. And now, as a parent, I am reinterpreting that event as even good for me. As a parent, I can't protect my children forever, nor would I want to. Going through adversity is part of growing up and learning how to take care of yourself, even at age 8. Do you see how this is connected to why when we recall those long-term memories, they become more pliable? We don't just passively record memories like a video camera. We constantly are straining to find meaning. How do they fit into my own schema of how the world works, and how does that event fit into my personal narrative about who I am and how I got here? Each time we recall a memory, it is up for reinterpretation because we are now new people. We are different from who we were a year ago, 5 years ago, or 10 years ago. We've grown in our understanding of the world and therefore our understanding of past experiences. So these realities about our memory are important to keep in mind. I think it should give us a dose of humility regarding what we remember, especially when we try to work through our relationships with the people around us. We may have forgotten important details about certain events in the past, and that's why you don't see eye to eye with someone. Perhaps it is time to go back and reinterpret some past hurt or offense because you may now have a better perspective on it. We should remember that each of us has our own story and experiences that have brought us to where we are, and we need to respect where each person is in their life. Wow, that was a lot of preamble to get us to the practical application. I think a quick review is in order. As learners, we are not empty vessels to be poured into. We are a complex map that needs shifted and changed to accommodate new knowledge. The purpose of testing is to show that knowledge that we have. So, what are the best ways to prepare for tests? Let's look at this question through a little game of versus. Cramming versus distributed practice. No, you've never crammed in your entire life, right? Well, cramming isn't great for true learning. The reason for this is based on how the brain learns. Synapses that form to take in new information are designed to encode by being activated every 60 to 90 minutes. And this new information can't happen just once, it must be repeated over time, which is where distributed practice comes in. Remember how I said that memory is strengthened through repetition? Well, it's not just volume of repetition that makes strong memories, it is also the spacing of the repetition. The difference between one study session for 10 hours and one study session for a half hour every day for 3 weeks is enormous. It's because you're not fighting against how your brain is designed. Now, don't get me wrong, cramming can sometimes get you through the test. However, if you're interested in actually learning the information and having a lot less stress, then you need to be slowly learning over time. The implication of this, I believe, changes how many students should approach studying. What if we break this up mathematical-like to illustrate why this is better? This example is going to be an oversimplified version of what's going on, but it will illustrate why spreading your learning out over time is not only advantageous for learning, but also essential for good time management, aka less stressed life. Let's say you have 5 classes, and in each class you have a test every 4 weeks. Each test will take you approximately 12 hours to prepare adequately for, just to get a passing grade. That means you have a total of 60 hours you'll need to spend in order to prepare for that test. If you spend 3 hours for each class every week, you will only have to study 15 hours every week in order to be ready for the test when the time comes. So that's 3 hours a day to work on school outside of class. You could do it Monday through Friday and have the weekends off. Now, if you decide to just wait and do all the studying right before the test, what's going to happen? You guessed it. If the first test of the 5 classes test day is at 8 a.m. on Tuesday, you've got to start studying on the Sunday before at 8 p.m. and not stop working until the first test. Not humanly possible. Now, I recognize this example is overly simplified. You may not need to study that much for one class, and there aren't that many tests in each class, and the tests certainly aren't all on the same day, etc., etc., etc. But even with a more complex schedule, you're still to some level doing the 60-hour study cramming session for 5 classes if you aren't spreading your studying throughout the weeks. Because really it is more complicated than that. You've got papers and projects and quizzes and all sorts of things you have to do on top of being tested. So rather than being disciplined about our study time, we think it's easier to kind of put out fires as they come up and sit back and relax as long as there's not a class for the next day. This way of thinking is detrimental not only to grades, but it hurts real learning, causes more stress and anxiety, and ultimately enslaves us to whatever the present moment dictates we should be doing. Now, I'm not saying I've got all this stuff figured out. I'm probably one of the worst people you'll meet about staying organized and working at a steady pace. But I am learning how to do it. Going over notes versus practice testing. Going over notes. It's my favorite pastime as an undergraduate. And going over notes is completely useless. Highlighting and reading passively through your textbook is one of the worst ways you can possibly study. I think the same principle applies for reading over notes. Unless you are very engaged and actually use the notes to self-test, reading over the notes does little more than familiarize you vaguely with the content. If you want to take the learning seriously, you've got to create practice tests. Practice tests will come in many forms and varieties. You could create flashcards, pre-write answers to short answers or essay questions. You could create your own true-false questions or fill-in-the-blank questions. Creating practice tests has multiple benefits. For starters, it adds recall and repetition to your studying. Recall is one of the most important aspects of memory and learning. The more you recall something, the stronger that connection becomes. Practice tests also put you in the actual situation. It simulates the environment and circumstances you will encounter when you are actually being tested over the material. Going over the notes is usually a pretty passive process. Practice tests also require you to spread out the studying. If you have put together a test and it takes you 30 minutes to go through the test, then you are going to need a break afterwards, which gives you some time to process and then restudy the material and then take the test again. Now, practice testing is not exclusively creating and taking a test. The most common form of practice testing may even be the note card. All-nighter versus full night sleep. Well, as you can imagine, again, the all-night studying can get you through, but it doesn't really constitute true learning. Staying up all night and studying is linked to poor grades. One scary fact is that one all-nighter can impair reasoning and memory for up to 4 days afterward. So you're not just affecting that next day, you're affecting the next 3 days of your life. Alright, you probably don't want to hear a bunch about why you should shouldn't pull the all-nighter studying thing. Your body already tells you each time you do it, your body already tells you each time you do it to never let it happen again! So I'd like to focus a little bit on how you should approach your own sleeping habits. Sleep is a process that occurs within the body that is generated by two systems: the circadian arousal system and the homeostatic sleep drive. Engage the homeostatic sleep drive. These two systems are constantly fighting each other for control. Our sleep-wake cycle occurs because one system gains control and then the other system gains control. The timing of this little war generates a continuum of when people are the most efficient in the day. The two groups can be classified as larks or owls. 10% of the population are larks. These are the people who wake up around 6 a.m. naturally, and they are the most efficient during the morning hours of the day. Another 10% of the population are owls. These people generally would prefer to wake up around 10 a.m. and to go to sleep after midnight. Then everyone else falls in between this. I bring this point up to emphasize the need to know yourself. College culture emphasizes late nights. Then there's the rest of the world that says, well, in the real world, early is best. I want you to know what's best for you. If you naturally don't wake up until 9 a.m. and stay up until 1 a.m. and that's what works for you, you should embrace it. Get classes that don't start until after that time. That way you'll be ready and prepared for class. If you're naturally a lark, then don't fall asleep into the trap of thinking you've got to stay up late. Get your rest. Take those 8 a.m. classes. The point is, know what's best for you and implement that to the best of your ability. Also, when you're not able to get your optimal schedule, recognize that as well, and do your best to adjust your habits. The other thing I'd like to address about sleep in college is something called sleep debt. There was a study done in which students who generally scored in the top 10% of scores had their sleep reduced every night by not a large portion. The students began to score in the bottom 9% of those who got full sleep. This phenomenon is called sleep debt. Over time, if you miss sleep even just a few hours a week, you'll have to make it up sometime or you'll pay the penalty. So get your sleep. A final note regarding sleep. There is no standard for a proper amount of sleep required to be functioning at peak efficiency. Some people need 7 hours, other people need 9. It really just depends on you and your body. So again, know yourself and know what's best for you and try to plan accordingly. Alright, the final study strategy that produces powerful results doesn't have an opposite that I'm aware of. The final strategy is prepare to teach the content. Research has shown this to be a very powerful practice for learning. The cool thing is that you don't even actually have to teach it, you just have to prepare as though you were going to teach it. There are some reasons for this. If you're going to teach something, you want to know what you're talking about. A big reason for this is so that you don't look silly when you're presenting the information. Also, when you prepare to teach, you have to have a deeper level of knowledge in order to teach whatever the subject matter is. Here's a simple example. If you are attempting to teach addition to a student, you could potentially only understand how addition works, and not understand subtraction or multiplication, and still be able to teach it. However, if you want to be able to field deeper questions and articulate the concept of addition, you will want to have an understanding of how subtraction, multiplication, and division are all interrelated. This is a deeper learning and a deeper understanding of things. Preparing to teach what you are studying also forces you to organize the material and think about how all the content is related. I hope at this point you have a deeper understanding of how we as humans learn and understand the world around us. And I hope you are able to connect these ideas to your own personal study habits. Remember that you are an individual and you need to find out what works for you. If some of the things I've had a negative opinion of work better for you, do it, such as highlighting and one-shot reading the book. The sleep thing isn't really an option if you want to be a great student. Finally, please remember all of these things you do need to be connected with meaning and purpose in your life. If you don't know where you're going or who you want to be, then you're not going to understand or know why the test you're studying for in biology matters when you're a communications major. You never know when you're going to use something in your future. Thanks for listening. Until next time.